I tell people I have a daughter, and I watch their faces soften, as if that single word is meant to unlock something warm in me. I nod at the appropriate places. I say her name. I keep my voice even. What I don't say is that when I think of her, my chest tightens the way it does before a storm, when the air goes heavy and everything feels charged with the promise of damage. I used to believe connection was automatic. You give birth to someone, you raise them, you love them, and they understand you, or at least they recognize you as theirs. I believed that the way I believed in gravity, without ever testing what would happen if I stepped off the edge. By the time she was 15, she wouldn't look at me. She would look through me, past me, as though I were an obstruction she'd learned to navigate around. A piece of furniture she resented but accepted as permanent. She moved through the house with a kind of deliberate hostility, every footstep louder than necessary, every door closed with intent. She knew exactly how much noise it took to communicate contempt without words. I tried not to react. I learned quickly that reaction fed her. Silence, on the other hand, enraged her in a quieter way. Silence suggested indifference, and that was the one thing she refused to believe about me, even as she accused me of it daily. "You don't even care," she'd say, usually from the doorway, her backpack still slung over one shoulder like she might leave again at any second. I'd look up from the sink, from the bills, from whatever domestic proof of my existence I was in the middle of. "I do care," I'd say, because that was the truth. She'd laugh. "You don't even know me." She was right about that, but not for the reasons she thought. I knew the shape of her habits, the way she left cups half full and plates half cleared, the way she chewed the inside of her cheek when she was thinking, the way her temper flashed hot and fast, like mine once had before I learned how to bury it under responsibility. I knew the clothes she hated, and the music she loved, and the way she rolled her eyes when she thought adults were being fake. What I didn't know was how to reach her without making everything worse. Every attempt landed wrong. Advice sounded like control. Concern sounded like accusation. Rules sounded like punishment. Even kindness felt like manipulation to her, as if everything I did was calculated, strategic, designed to box her in. Maybe some of it was. I didn't grow up believing love was enough. Love was something you proved by staying fed, by staying alive, by staying out of trouble. Love was structure. Love was showing up even when you didn't want to. Love was endurance. My daughter wanted something else. I didn't know what it was, only that I didn't have it. She said then that I never listened, that I decided who she was before she ever got to tell me, that I saw her rebellion before I saw her pain. My name is Melanie, and I learned early that my mother's attention came with strings. If I cried, she wanted a reason. If I was angry, she wanted an explanation that fit neatly into her understanding of the world. She didn't like emotions she couldn't solve. She treated them like messes, things to be cleaned up quickly, efficiently, without lingering. "Use your words," she'd say, like words weren't the problem. But my words always sounded wrong once they reached her ears. They came back to me altered, softened, corrected, reframed into something smaller and more manageable, something less threatening. When I was little, I tried harder. I explained myself carefully. I practiced conversations in my head. I brought her problems that had edges she could grip. As I got older, I stopped. What was the point of explaining yourself to someone who already knew the ending? The first real fight, the one I still think of as the beginning, happened over something small. It always does. Melanie was 14. She came home an hour late, no phone call, no text. I'd been pacing the living room, my imagination doing what it always did, catastrophizing, rewriting the world into a place where harm was always one misstep away. When she finally walked in, She didn't apologize or explain. She dropped her shoes by the door and walked past me like I wasn't there. I felt something snap. A thread pulled too tight for too long. "Where were you?" I said. Not a question, a demand. She stopped, turned and looked at me with that expression I would come to know intimately. The one that said, "I'm already guilty in your eyes, so why bother?" "Out." "With who?" Melanie shrugged. "People. You were supposed to be home at 6. I was busy." The casualness of it hit me harder than any insult. Busy. As if my fear was an inconvenience, as if the rules were optional suggestions. "You don't get to decide that," I said. "You don't get to just ignore me." Her mouth twisted. "I didn't ignore you. I just didn't tell you." The logic of teenagers is a special kind of cruelty. It wears confidence like armor. "You could have been hurt," I said. "You could have." "But I wasn't," she cut in. "So can you stop?" I should have stopped. I should have taken a breath. I should have remembered that fear often disguises itself as anger. Instead, I grounded her and Boy. She exploded. Her words were thrown like knives, each one chosen for impact. She accused me of control, of suffocation, of never trusting her. She said I treated her like a child. She said I didn't care how she felt. "I care enough to set boundaries," I said, clinging to reason like it was a shield. "You care about rules more than me," she shot back. That sentence lodged itself somewhere deep. I felt it there for years, working its way through me. My mother was always waiting for me to prove her right. I could see it in her eyes the moment my voice changed, the moment my posture stiffened. She braced herself for disappointment, like it was a familiar impact. Like she'd already learned how to fall. When she grounded me, it wasn't about being late. It was about reminding me who had the power. About showing me that no matter how big I got, how loud I became, I still belonged to her. I didn't want to belong to anyone. I wanted to be seen without being owned. After that night, everything escalated. Melanie started pushing boundaries deliberately. Later curfews, missed calls, locked doors, music too loud, silence where there used to be noise. She learned my triggers and pressed them with surgical precision. I responded with rules, with consequences, with the kind of tight control that masquerades as safety. We became adversaries living under the same roof. Teachers called, guidance counselors frowned sympathetically. Friends told me, "It's just a phase," as if time alone could fix a wound that deepened with every passing day. At night I lay awake and replayed conversations, searching for the moment everything went wrong. I wondered if there had been a version of me, a softer, braver, less afraid version that could have met her where she was instead of trying to pull her back to where I needed her to be. But daylight always brought resolve, structure, the belief that if I just held firm, she would come back to me. She never did. She drifted further away, toward people I didn't know, ideas I didn't understand, anger I couldn't touch. The more she resisted, the more I tightened my grip, convinced that letting go would mean losing her forever. "I feel like I'm drowning," Melanie thought. The house felt smaller every day. Every rule felt like proof that she didn't trust me. Every question felt like an interrogation. I learned to lie because honesty never brought me freedom, only longer lectures, heavier consequences. She says she was afraid for me, but I was afraid of her. Not physically or emotionally. I was afraid of being erased under her concern. Afraid of becoming the version of myself she was already disappointed in. So I rebelled, loudly, messily. I made myself impossible to ignore. If she couldn't love who I was, I'd force her to see me anyway. By the time I realized we were speaking different languages entirely, it felt too late to learn hers. I was the mother, she was the daughter. The roles were set, the expectations immovable, and somewhere in the space between fear and fury, We lost each other. By 16, Melanie had perfected the art of absence. She was physically present, her shoes by the door, her coat slung over the chair, her room humming with music, but she was no longer with me in any way that mattered. Conversations were reduced to logistics. Yes. No. Later. Fine. Whatever. She spoke to me the way one speaks to a clerk or a stranger on a bus. Efficient, guarded, and forgettable. I told myself this was normal adolescence. Every book said so. Every professional nodded knowingly and reassured me that resistance meant growth. But this wasn't resistance. This was refusal. There were nights she didn't come home at all. Nights I sat at the kitchen table with the light on, my phone face up untouched, my coffee cold. I learned the texture of waiting, how it scraped at the inside of your ribs, how your mind offered you worst-case scenarios like gifts you couldn't refuse. When she finally did come home, she'd look at me like I was embarrassing myself by being awake. "You don't have to wait up," she said once, dropping her keys onto the counter. "I do," I replied. "Why?" The question wasn't curiosity, it was a challenge. "Because you're my daughter." She stared at me with her expression flat. "That doesn't answer anything." I didn't have a better one. Every time I tried to reach for her emotionally, verbally, or physically, she flinched, sometimes subtly, sometimes not. A shoulder pulled away, a door closed faster than necessary, a glare sharp enough to cut. Once, without thinking, I touched her arm while she was passing me in the hallway. I didn't want to stop her. It was just a reflexive gesture, a reminder of contact. She recoiled like I'd burned her. "Don't touch me," she snapped. I froze. The space between us felt radioactive. "I didn't mean—" "I said don't," she repeated louder. Her eyes were bright, angry, almost desperate. "You don't get to do that." Something in me hardened then. "Fine," I said. "I won't." Melanie sat in her room. She touched me like she was reminding herself I was still hers. I hated how small it made me feel, like I could be reduced to a child with a single gesture, like my body didn't belong entirely to me yet. When I pulled away, I saw the hurt flicker across her face. I saw it, and I didn't care. I was tired of caring about her feelings when she treated mine like an inconvenience. If she wanted distance, I'd give it to her. I just didn't think she'd survive it. School became a battlefield. Calls from administrators came weekly. They told me Melanie missed classes, she was failing grades, had confrontations with teachers who mistook defiance for stupidity. I attended meetings where adults talked about my daughter as if she were a problem to be solved instead of a person unraveling. "She's bright," one counselor said gently, as if trying to console me, "but she's angry." Angry felt like a word too small for what lived inside her. At home, she refused help. She refused therapy and refused conversations longer than a minute. Every suggestion I made was met with suspicion. "You just want to fix me," she accused once. "I want to understand you." She laughed, a bitter sound. "You don't understand anything about me." I wanted to scream that I was trying, that I had been trying since the day she was born, that I didn't know how to love her in a way she could feel without losing myself entirely. Instead, I said, "Then help me." She stared at me like I'd just proven her point. From Melanie's side, my mother always wanted me to do the emotional labor, like explain or translate myself, make myself palatable. Why was it my job to teach her how to love me? She was the adult. She was the one with the power, the rules, the house, the authority to punish and forgive. I didn't want to help her understand me. I wanted her to stop trying to mold me. The worst fight happened on a Tuesday. She came home smelling like smoke and something sweet I didn't recognize at first. I asked her where she'd been, but she ignored me. I asked again. "Out," she said. "With who?" There was silence. My voice rose and hers followed. Words piled on words until neither of us could hear anything except our own righteousness. "You're throwing your life away," I said, the sentence tumbling out before I could stop it. Melanie went still. "You think I care about that?" she asked quietly. "I think you don't realize how permanent consequences are." She smiled then, a slow, unsettling smile. "Everything's permanent to you. That's why you're so afraid." The cruelty of her accuracy stunned me. "You don't get to psychoanalyze me," I snapped. "I live with you," she shot back. "It's hard not to." I told her she couldn't see her friends anymore, that she was grounded indefinitely, that I would pull her from school if I had to. She told me she hated me. Something inside me cracked. "Fine," I said, "if that's how you feel." She watched me carefully then, as if waiting for something worse. Instead, I turned away. That was the first time I chose distance over discipline. From Melanie's side, Mom didn't fight back. She just stopped mattering to me. When she turned away, I felt like I was falling through air where ground should have been. I wanted her to yell, to punish me, to care enough to retaliate. But she didn't. She let me go. The days after were eerily quiet. We orbited each other like strangers. No rules enforced, no questions asked. She came and went as she pleased. I told myself I was giving her space. The truth was, I was afraid to touch the wound again. She noticed the shift immediately. At first, she tested it. She stayed out later, broke obvious rules and left messes where I'd see them. I said nothing. Confusion crept into her anger, then suspicion. One night, she cornered me in the kitchen. "What's your game?" she demanded. "No game. You don't care anymore." I looked at her, at the exhaustion under the defiance, at the hurt she wore like armor. "I care," I said. "I just don't know how to reach you without hurting you." She swallowed hard, then looked away. "Too late," she muttered. From her side, Mom wanted absolution without accountability, understanding without boundaries, love without weight. I couldn't give her that, and she couldn't forgive me for it. So we stood on opposite sides of a bridge neither of us knew how to cross. The night she didn't come home, I knew something had finally broken for good. It wasn't the first time she'd stayed out all night, but it was the first time she hadn't bothered to pretend otherwise. There were no messages, no excuse prepared in advance, no half-hearted apology waiting in the doorway. Midnight passed, then 1, then 2. I told myself I wouldn't panic. I told myself this was the distance I'd chosen, that this was what letting go looked like, but my body didn't listen. My hands shook, my heart raced in erratic bursts. Every sound outside made me stand up too quickly, hope flaring and dying in the same breath. I didn't call the police or her friends. Pride and fear tangled together until I couldn't separate them. I sat on the couch, the dark pressing in, replaying every conversation that had led us here. When she finally came in just before dawn, I was still awake. She paused when she saw me. Surprise flickered across her face, but it disappeared as quickly. She hadn't expected me to be there. "You didn't call," I said. "You didn't ask me to," she replied. The exhaustion in her voice was real. So was the edge. "Where were you?" She shrugged, slipping off her shoes. "Out." "With who?" She hesitated just long enough to tell me it mattered. "People," she said again. Then quieter. "People who don't ask so many questions." That did it. Something ancient rose up in me, fear stripped of civility, fear without language. "You can't keep doing this," I said. "You're a minor. You live here." "For now," she shot back. The implication hit harder than the words. "You don't mean that." She turned and finally looked at me. Her eyes were bloodshot, her face thinner than I remembered. "I mean it," she said. "I'm counting the days." The room felt suddenly too small to hold both of us. Where would you go? I asked. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Anywhere but here. Melanie had been planning it for months. Every argument added fuel. Every silence confirmed her decision. She kept a bag hidden under her bed. She memorized phone numbers. She made promises she couldn't possibly keep, to people who didn't care if she broke them. The house felt like a cage. Her mother's restraint felt worse than control. At least control meant engagement. Restraint felt like erasure. If her mother wasn't going to fight for her, she'd fight for herself, even if it destroyed everything. The call came 3 days later. I was at work. A number I didn't recognize lit up my phone, and something in my chest tightened before I even answered. "Is this Melanie's mother?" a man asked. "Yes." "We have your daughter at the police station." The room tilted. "She's safe," he added quickly, "but she needs to be picked up." I didn't ask what she'd done. I already knew the shape of it. She was sitting in a plastic chair when I arrived, hoodie pulled tight around herself, her knee bouncing. She didn't look at me. The officer explained calmly. She was arrested for trespassing and public disturbance. Nothing criminal enough to leave a mark, but enough to scare me in ways I couldn't articulate. "She refused to give a contact," he said. "Eventually, she gave your number." Eventually. In the car, silence stretched between us. "You didn't have to come," she muttered. "I did," I said. She laughed bitterly. "Of course you did. You always do the responsible thing." The accusation stung more than I expected. At home, she went straight to her room. I followed, and for once I didn't knock. "We need to talk," I said. "No," she replied flat. "This isn't optional." She spun around then, eyes blazing. "Everything with you is mandatory," she shouted. "That's the problem. I'm trying to keep you safe." "From what?" she demanded. "From being alive?" The words hit like a slap. "You think I don't know you hate it here," she continued. "You think I don't know you wish I was easier, quieter, more grateful. That's not true." She stepped closer, her voice trembling. "You don't like who I am." I opened my mouth and closed it again, because liking had nothing to do with it. "I love you," I said instead. She scoffed. "That's not the same thing." She was right. Love without understanding felt like a trap. My mother loved me the way you love a responsibility, a duty, a thing you endure. I wanted to be chosen, wanted to be wanted, not managed. When my mother said "I love you," it sounded like an obligation, like a sentence she'd memorized, and something inside her finally went quiet. 2 weeks later, Melanie left, leaving only a short note on the counter. "I need to figure out who I am without you watching." That sentence haunted me. I didn't chase her. I stood in the kitchen and stared at the note until the words blurred. This was what letting go really meant. Days passed, then weeks, then months. Occasional updates filtered through mutual acquaintances. She was staying with friends, then a boyfriend, then nowhere permanent. I told myself she needed this. That space would soften her anger. It didn't. When she finally reached out, it was to tell me she wasn't coming back. From her side, the call was a mercy. Melanie rehearsed it 100 times. She wanted to sound calm, like an adult certain of herself. Her mother answered on the first ring. "I'm not moving back," she said before she could lose her nerve. There was silence for a while, then quietly. "Are you safe?" The question undid her. "Safe enough," she said. "I want to help you." "I don't want your help." Another pause. "I don't know how to be your mother the way you want," her mother said, "but I don't stop being your mother just because you leave." The words landed heavy. "I didn't ask you to stop," she replied. "I asked you to let me go." When the call ended, I sat with the phone in my hand long after the line went dead. I had lost her, and it was both our faults. There was no villain here. No single moment I could point to and say, that's where I failed. Just a series of choices made in fear, colliding with choices made in anger. She wanted freedom. I wanted safety. Neither of us knew how to give the other what they needed without surrendering ourselves. Time doesn't heal everything. That's something people say when they're afraid of what happens if it doesn't. Time only widens the distance enough that you can look at it without flinching. The house changed after she left. Not dramatically, subtly. It felt quieter. Her absence settled into the walls like a second coat of paint, impossible to ignore once you knew it was there. I didn't touch her room for months, then longer. Dust gathered on surfaces she'd once slammed her hands onto in anger. The smell of her lingered, something sweet and sour and uniquely hers. I would stand in the doorway and feel like I was trespassing in a space that no longer belonged to me. People asked how she was. I learned to answer, without telling the truth. She's figuring things out, I'd say. She needs space. She's strong. All of it was partially true. None of it was enough. From her side, I imagined she told a different story. She told people her mother was controlling, cold, and impossible to please. None of it felt like lying. It felt like editing. When people nodded sympathetically, when they shared their own stories of parents who didn't listen, something in her loosened. She wasn't alone. She wasn't broken. She was reacting to something real. At night, though, when she lay awake in borrowed beds, she thought about the house, about the way her mother folded laundry, about the quiet weight of being cared for even when it felt suffocating. She missed it and hated herself for missing it. We spoke rarely, only on birthdays, obligatory holidays, text here and there that said, "Hope you're okay," without really asking the question. When we did talk, we danced around the past like it might explode if acknowledged directly. I asked about work, about money, about health, practical things, safe things. She answered politely, distantly, like someone humoring a relative they didn't fully trust. I wanted to ask if she was happy, but I was afraid of the answer. Once, after a year of this careful stalemate, I tried to say what I'd never managed before. "I didn't know how to love you without being afraid," I said into the phone, "and I think I made that your problem." She was quiet for a long time. "I know," she said finally. From her side, that moment mattered more than she expected. It wasn't an apology or trying to repair, but it was the first time her mother hadn't defended herself, hadn't explained, hadn't justified. She heard the fear underneath the control for the first time. It didn't fix anything, but it softened the edges. We exist now in a fragile truce. I don't tell her what to do. She doesn't tell me how much she resents what I did. We speak like adults who share a complicated history and don't quite know what to do with it. Sometimes I catch glimpses of the child she was, the one who laughed easily, who once reached for my hand without hesitation. Other times I see the woman she's becoming, forged partly in opposition to me. I live with the knowledge that I shaped her as much by what I couldn't give as by what I did. That's the part no one prepares you for. I'd like to take a moment and pause. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Please show a kindness by clicking like and subscribe. It would help our channel so much. Let's continue our story. From her side, the story never becomes simple. She doesn't hate her mother. That's the part that surprises her most. Hate would be easier. What she feels instead is grief for the version of their relationship that never existed, for the conversations that always collapsed under their own weight, for the closeness that felt just out of reach. She knows her mother loved her. She just doesn't know how to live with the cost of that love. I still say I have one daughter, and I still mean it. Even if the connection between us is thin and strained and sometimes painful, it exists. Not as something warm and constant, but as something real. We didn't get a story of healing, we got a story of survival, and maybe that's all this was ever going to be. Motherhood isn't just about love, it's about limitation, about discovering too late that your best might still not be enough for the person who needed something else entirely. Thank you for being here, for listening to my story. Please share with someone who needs to hear this. God bless you.